Every password you've ever typed, every bank login, every crypto wallet, every single HTTPS padlock icon in your browser, all of it is protected by one simple idea. Certain math problems are so hard that even the world's fastest supercomputers would need longer than the age of the universe to solve them. That idea has kept the entire internet safe for almost 50 years through online banking, e-commerce, encrypted messaging, and basically every digital secret you've ever trusted to a screen. And in the last 12 months, that idea has started quietly falling apart, far faster than almost anyone in the field expected, including the researchers who study this for a living. Here's how your passwords actually get protected behind the scenes, in plain language. When you log into your bank, your password itself usually isn't what's flying across the internet. Instead, your device and key cryptography to scramble that connection completely, agreeing on a shared secret key in full view of anyone watching, without ever transmitting that key directly. Two of the most common systems doing that scrambling are called RSA and elliptic curve cryptography, or ECC for short. Both of them rely on math problems, like factoring an enormous number into its prime building blocks, that a regular computer simply cannot brute force in any reasonable amount of time, even running every computer on Earth in parallel for the rest of human history. That's where quantum computers come in, and why they're fundamentally different from anything that came before them. Back in 1994, a mathematician named Peter Shor proved that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could solve exactly those hard math problems, the ones protecting RSA and ECC, in a tiny fraction of the time a normal computer would need. For decades, this stayed purely theoretical, because nobody could actually build a quantum computer big enough or stable enough to run Shor's algorithm on real-world encryption. The threat was real on paper, but comfortably distant in practice. Quick explainer on why quantum computers can pull this off at all in case you're new here. A regular computer stores information as bits, simple ones, and zeros, one at a time. A quantum computer uses qubits instead, which can exist in a strange in-between state called superposition, effectively representing many possibilities at once rather than just one. Link enough qubits together correctly, and the system can explore an enormous number of possible solutions to a math problem simultaneously, instead of checking them one by one the way a normal computer has to. That's the entire reason factoring a giant number, something that would take a classical computer longer than the universe has existed, suddenly becomes realistic for a sufficiently powerful quantum machine. That comfortable distance is exactly what just changed. Back in 2019, researchers estimated that breaking a standard 2048-bit RSA key would require roughly 20 million physical qubits, an almost unimaginable number compared to anything that existed at the time. Engineers and security experts treat that number like a finish line nobody would cross for decades. It let entire industries relay X and assume Q day, the day quantum computers can actually break our encryption, was something for the 2040s or 2050s to worry about. If a number like 20 million qubits sounding totally safe for decades surprises you even a little, stick around, because that safety net just got pulled out from under everyone. Smash that like button and subscribe, because the timeline is about to move a lot faster than you'd think. Between May 2025 and March 2026, in less than 12 months, 3 separate research papers completely rewrote that math. Researchers didn't build a bigger quantum computer. They found smarter, more efficient ways to attack the same encryption using far fewer qubits than anyone thought necessary. That 20 million qubit estimate for RSA has effectively collapsed to under 1 million, with some newer architectures suggesting it could eventually drop below 100,000 entirely. In March 2026, Google's own quantum AI team released a study focused specifically on elliptic curve cryptography, the exact system, protecting Bitcoin, Ethereum, and most modern digital signatures. Their research showed a quantum computer with fewer than 500,000 physical qubits could potentially break that encryption in minutes, not years. That's roughly 10 times less than what experts believed was necessary just 1 year earlier. That same month, a separate research collaboration between Caltech, Berkeley, and a company called Oratomic published a preprint exploring neutral atom quantum computers, a different hardware approach entirely. Their estimate was even more aggressive. They calculated that Shor's algorithm could realistically run on as few as 10,000 to 20,000 atomic qubits. In one specific design they proposed, a system with around 26,000 qubits could crack Bitcoin's encryption in a matter of days. If the words "crack Bitcoin's encryption in a matter of days" just made you sit up a little straighter, that's exactly the reaction researchers had too. Go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because the numbers only get more specific from here. A separate ongoing effort called the Quantum Doomsday Clock Project has actually published exact logical qubit targets for breaking today's most common encryption. According to their calculations, breaking RSA 2048 requires roughly 2,114 logical qubits. RSA 4096 needs about 3,971. Breaking ECC 256, the elliptic curve standard protecting most cryptocurrency wallets, requires just 1,673 logical qubits, the smallest target of the three by a wide margin. Based on the current pace of quantum hardware progress, that same project's quantum computers could reach the logical qubits needed to break Bitcoin's encryption by roughly March 2028, which at the time these calculations were published was barely 2 years away. Now, an important distinction here, so this doesn't come across as pure fear-mongering. None of this means your password gets stolen the moment you read this. The quantum computers capable of running these attacks at scale don't exist yet. Full stop. And nobody serious in the field is claiming otherwise. What's changed isn't that the attack is happening today. What's changed is how much less time we actually have left before it becomes possible. And that gap has shrunk dramatically faster than almost any previous projection. But here's the part that should genuinely worry you, even before any of those future quantum computers ever get built. It's called a harvest now, decrypt later attack, and security agencies say it's already happening today, right now, while you're watching this video. Encrypted data flying across the internet right now, government communications, healthcare records, corporate trade secrets, can simply be captured and stored by anyone with the resources to do it. They don't need to crack it today. They just need to wait for a quantum computer capable of unlocking it later, then decrypt years of stolen data all at once. National security agencies in multiple countries, including the NSA and the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, have publicly named Harvest Now, Decrypt Later, as one of the central reasons they're pushing migration deadlines now instead of waiting until a quantum computer actually exists. Their reasoning is straightforward. By the time the threat becomes obvious to everyone, the data will already be sitting in someone else's archive. If you didn't know, your encrypted data could already be sitting in someone's storage drive right now, waiting for a future quantum computer to unlock it. That's worth a like and a subscribe on its own, because this next part covers exactly how close that future actually is. So where do real quantum computers actually stand today, separate from all the theoretical math? In December 2024, Google unveiled a chip called Willow, packing 105 superconducting qubits. Willow achieved something researchers had chased for decades, called below-threshold error correction, where adding more qubits actually makes the system more reliable instead of less. As a demonstration, Willow completed a benchmark calculation in about 5 minutes. That would take the fastest classical supercomputer on Earth roughly 10 septillion years to finish, a number with 25 zeros after it. IBM has been racing along a parallel track, focused less on raw qubit count and more on connecting multiple chips together. Their Kookaburra processor design called for 1,386 qubits, scaling into a 4,158 qubit linked system using quantum communication links between chips. By May of 2026, IBM successfully interconnected 4 of its Flamingo processors into a single modular system functioning as roughly 4,000 qubits, acting together as one unit. That same period brought a separate breakthrough in error correction efficiency, using something called QLDPC codes, which dropped the overhead from needing 1,000 physical qubits to support just one reliable logical qubit, down to roughly 100 physical qubits per logical qubit. If that dropped from 1,000 to 1 ratio down to 100 to 1 sounds like a small technical detail, it isn't. It's one of the biggest efficiency jumps in the entire field's history, and yes, that's worth a subscribe to if you want to actually understand where this is heading next. Google and IBM aren't the only ones racing here either. IonQ uses a completely different approach called trapped ion qubits, recently reporting a record of 36 high-fidelity algorithmic qubits. A metric they argue better reflects real usable computing power than raw qubit count alone, since each additional algorithmic qubit roughly doubles the number of states the system can consider simultaneously. Quantinuum, a joint venture born from Honeywell and Cambridge Quantum, runs its own trapped ion systems and reportedly filed confidential paperwork in January 2026 for a public stock offering that could value the company at around $20 billion, which would make it one of the highest valued pure-play quantum companies ever to reach public markets. There's also a geopolitical layer driving all of this funding. China has placed quantum technology at the very top of its latest 5-year plan, funneling somewhere around $16 to $17 billion in the United States, responded by directly funding 9 quantum computing companies with a combined $2 billion through the Department of Commerce, a move that sent shares of companies like Rigetti and D-Wave surging more than 50% within 2 days. When two global superpowers start treating a technology as worth billions of dollars in direct state investment, that's rarely a sign the underlying threat is exaggerated. If that race for quantum dominance surprised you, smash that like button because this story still has a few more turns left. To be completely fair here, today's real quantum computers still aren't close to running these attacks. We're talking about machines with a few hundred to a few thousand physical qubits, while breaking real-world encryption at scale still requires tens of thousands to potentially millions of physical qubits, depending on which research estimate you trust. The gap hasn't closed entirely, but the gap has shrunk dramatically on two fronts simultaneously: hardware capability climbing steadily upward, and the algorithmic resources required to attack encryption dropping just as steadily downward at the same time. It's worth understanding just how much this prediction has moved over time, because the trend itself tells a story. Experts have known about the theoretical risk of Q-Day since the 1990s, right after Shor first published his algorithm. For most of that time, the consensus answer was simple: somewhere in the 2040s or 2050s, comfortably outside most people's working careers. By the early 2020s, that estimate had tightened to sometime in the 2030s. Now in 2026, one of the world's largest tech companies is publicly planning around 2029. That's not a small adjustment. That's the prediction compressing by an entire decade in roughly 5 years. And it raises an obvious question. If the estimate moved this much in 5 years, what does it look like 5 years from now? None of this is as simple as flipping a switch either, which is exactly why agencies are setting deadlines years in advance instead of waiting. Replacing the cryptography underneath the entire internet means touching banking systems, government, databases, medical record platforms, industrial control systems, and billions of individual devices, many of which were never designed to be updated remotely at all. Security researchers call this discovery and migration problem cryptographic inventory. And for most large organizations, nobody actually has a complete list of every place RSA or ECC is quietly running in the background. That's part of why NIST started publishing migration guidance years before the standards were even finalized, and why deadlines stretch all the way out to 2035 for the most deeply embedded systems. Governments and standards bodies clearly aren't waiting around for that gap to close before acting. In August 2024, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, officially finalized its first 3 post-quantum cryptography standards, known as FIPS 203, 204, and 205, after an 8-year global evaluation process involving researchers from around the world. In March 2025, NIST added a 5th algorithm called HQC, specifically for post-quantum encryption, giving organizations multiple, mathematically distinct options to migrate toward in case weaknesses are ever found in any single approach. So what actually replaces RSA and ECC once they're no longer safe? The leading approach is called lattice-based cryptography, and the simple version goes like this. Instead of relying on factoring large numbers, these new algorithms rely on a different kind of math problem, finding a specific point hidden inside an extremely high-dimensional geometric lattice. Even a quantum computer running Shor's algorithm doesn't have a known shortcut for that particular type of problem, at least not yet. The good news is this isn't some far-off experimental concept. These standards are already finalized, already published, and already being built into browsers, operating systems, and banking infrastructure as you're watching this. Major browsers and encrypted messaging apps have already started quietly layering these new lattice-based algorithms on top of existing encryption, running both systems side by side, and so that even if one is eventually broken, the other still holds the connection secure. The National Security Agency has set hard deadlines of its own through a framework called CNSA 2.0. Every new national security system has to use quantum-safe algorithms starting January 2027. Full application migration across existing systems is required by 2030, with complete infrastructure. Migration mandated by 2035. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency was required to publish a list of quantum-safe product categories by December 2025. And standard web encryption, the TLS protocol securing most of the websites you visit daily, is required to adopt a quantum-resistant successor by January 2030. If government agencies are setting hard legal deadlines years in advance for a threat that supposedly doesn't exist yet, that alone should tell you something about how seriously this is actually being taken behind closed doors. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed, because even Google just moved its own internal deadline up. In a blog post published in early 2026, Google announced it was shortening its own internal timeline for transitioning to post-quantum cryptography, setting an internal target of 2029 instead of the roughly 2030 timeline it had previously aligned itself with. According to reporting from CNN in May 2026, Google explicitly warned that quantum computers may be able to hack some encrypted systems as early as 2029, a timeline that drastically narrows the window cybersecurity specialists had been working with for years. Google was careful to clarify this isn't a guarantee a quantum computer capable of that exists by then. It's simply no longer a risk worth treating as comfortably distant. That sense of urgency has gone industry-wide. An industry coalition formally declared 2026 the year of quantum security, holding launch events in January 2026 that featured senior officials from the FBI, NIST, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, all sharing the same stage, when the FBI, NIST, and CISA all show up together to talk about a single emerging threat that's generally not happening for something theoretical or decades away. Break this down by sector for a second, because the risk isn't evenly spread. Banking and payment systems sit near the top of the list, since financial regulators require records to stay protected for years, sometimes decades, after a transaction happens. Healthcare records carry the same long shelf life, since medical privacy laws often demand confidentiality for the patient's entire lifetime, meaning data recorded today could still need protecting in the 2080s. Government and defense communications are an obvious target too, which is exactly why the NSA built CNSA 2.0 around hard deadlines in the first place. And then there's cryptocurrency, where EECC 256 directly secures the wallets holding people's actual money, with no bank or government able to reverse a quantum-powered theft after the fact. No fraud, department to call, and no chargeback process to fall back on. Each of these sectors is currently being targeted by exactly the harvest now, decrypt later approach we talked about earlier, often without the organization even realizing it's happening. So what does any of this actually mean for you personally, sitting there with your email, your banking app, and your crypto wallet, if you have one? It means the password itself was never really the weak point to begin with. The math underneath it, the encryption silently protecting that password as it travels across the internet, is what's now racing against an accelerating countdown clock. Your password manager still works today, two-factor authentication still works today. None of this collapses overnight, and panic isn't useful here. But the data being collected and stored right now by anyone patient enough to wait has an expiration date that just moved dramatically closer than anyone expected even 18 months ago. If you're wondering what you can actually do about any of this right now, the honest answer is not much falls directly on you yet, and that's by design. The migration to quantum-safe encryption is mostly a job for banks, governments, and software companies updating systems quietly behind the scenes, not something the average person has to manually configure on their own devices. What you can do is keep your software and browser updated, since quantum-resistant encryption rolls out automatically through those updates as companies adopt the new NIST standards. For genuinely long-lived secrets, sensitive documents you need protected for decades rather than years, it's worth specifically asking whether the service you're using has already started its post-quantum migration. If a practical answer like that was more useful to you than just another scary headline, that's exactly why hitting subscribe matters, because we'll be tracking exactly how this migration plays out as it happens. Nobody can tell you the exact date Q-Day actually arrives, and frankly, anyone who claims they can with total certainty is probably trying to sell you something or scare you into buying it. What we do know is this: the 20 million qubit safety net everyone was counting on has effectively been cut down to a fraction of that size in less than a year. Hardware is closing the remaining gap faster than experts predicted, and the world's biggest tech companies and national security agencies have already started moving, quietly but unmistakably, like people who know exactly how much time is actually left on the clock. Step back and look at the full picture for a second. A piece of math that felt untouchable for 50 straight years just had its safety margin cut down dramatically in under 12 months through pure research, without a single new quantum computer even being built in the process. Two of the largest economies on Earth are now pouring billions of dollars into building the hardware that closes the remaining gap even faster. And the very organizations responsible for protecting national infrastructure are treating this as urgent enough to set legally binding deadlines years in advance, rather than waiting to see what happens. That combination, shrinking math on one side and growing investment on the other, is exactly how timelines that once felt comfortably distant suddenly stop feeling that way at all. If you made it this far, you clearly want to actually understand where this is heading instead of just scrolling past another scary headline pretending your password gets stolen tonight. So do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment letting me know if this changed how seriously you take your own online security. Because based on everything we just walked through, the countdown to Q-Day just got a whole lot shorter than any of us were told to expect.